This is Brian Rada. I'm a planner in FRA's Office of Policy and Planning. And you should see the agenda for today's webinar up on the screen. Our goal today is to give you a solid grounding in the federal-state partnership program, explain how to apply, and share a number of best practices based on our experience reviewing discretionary program applications. We also want to reserve a good chunk of time to answer your questions. Now, before we begin, we have two poll questions to learn a bit more about all of you in the audience. And if you're viewing in full screen mode, you may not see the first poll question pop up, so you may need to go out of full screen to see that. I'll also note we have 7 possible responses, so if you're not seeing all of those, just sort of scroll down and we'll give you all a moment to respond to that poll. Okay, looks like we have a range of people who are here. We have a number of state representatives, also several folks from public agencies, Amtrak, and a number of other industry or consultant folks, and some folks in other groups. So it's nice to see a diverse representation on the webinar today. We also have a second polling question just to see how many of you participated in previous webinars we've done on our discretionary programs. So you should see that now popping your screen, and I'll give you a few minutes to respond to that question as well. Give you just a few more seconds to respond to this poll question. All right, so it looks like we have a number of people who have attended, especially with the previous CRISI program, and then we have a number of new attendees who have not attended one of these webinars before, which is great. It'll be a refresher. Some of the material here will be a refresher for some of you, and a lot of it will be new, so that's great to see. All right, I'll take you through this first chunk of the presentation, which is actually an overview of the program, and kind of walk you through some of the key features. The full name of the program is the Federal State Partnership for State of Good Repair Program. Since that's a bit of a mouthful, I'm going to generally refer to it as either the Fed State Partnership or the Partnership Program for short. Starting with kind of the purpose and a review of the funding that's available. You see there, our purpose is to fund capital projects across the U.S. to repair, replace, or rehabilitate qualified railroad assets, to reduce the state of repair backlog, and improve intercity passenger rail performance. Now I know there's a lot of terms in there, and in the following slides we'll dig into a number of those terms and kind of spec them out a little bit better so you have a better sense of what all that means. And then, as you notice, we published this Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, on November 16th. We made available up to $272.25 million from combined fiscal year 17 and 18 appropriations. And our due date for applications is Monday, March 18th, 2019 by 5 p.m. Eastern. One other thing I wanted to note, I have received this question from folks. We do allow concurrent applications, so you could apply to this program with applications you've also submitted to other federal programs such as BUILD or Infra or the CRISI program. If you choose to do so, though, please make sure in your application that you indicate those other programs where it's been submitted, and that you provide any further information if anything substantively has changed about that application with what you're submitted to Fed State that's different from the submission to the other program. I mentioned I'd get into some of the key terms. All these definitions are in the NOFO, and you can refer to them there, but I wanted to call them out because they're specific and distinct to this program relative to some of the other programs you might have previously been involved in. So first, on a capital project, there's two complementary definitions of the capital project in the Fed-State partnership. The first is a project primarily intended to replace, rehabilitate, or repair major infrastructure assets used in intercity passenger rail service. And the second is a project primarily intended to improve intercity passenger rail performance. Notice both of these focus on intercity passenger rail. This program is focused on assets that are used in intercity passenger rail, and project must provide an intercity passenger rail benefit. You also note there the sort of a sub-definition of major capital project, and that's a project we've defined as any project with a proposed total project cost of $300 million or greater. There is a few sections in the NOFO where we describe further things that applicants proposing major capital projects can provide additional information to us at FRA in their application, explaining what particular phases or elements of their project they might be pursuing at this time and which ones they might pursue in the future. And they can provide information on anticipated funding requests beyond this NOFO, which FRA may use to issue a letter of intent to a potential grantee that would indicate FRA's intent to issue grants to that project out of future appropriations, but is not an obligation of FRA to do so. Second definition there is the definition of state of good repair. Now this definition here describes describes what assets would be like when they are in a state of good repair condition. So that is the condition where physical assets are in fact performing at a level at least equal to their as-built or modified design specification, and their life cycle costs is lower than cost of replacing, and they're being sustained through regular maintenance and replacement programs. So that describes when assets are in a state of repair. And I also just want to note the Northeast Corridor has a very specific definition in this program. The territory is specified as the main rail line between Boston and the District of Columbia, and then the branch lines between Harrisburg and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Springfield, Massachusetts, and New Haven, Connecticut, and from Penn Station, New York to Spuyten Duyvil, New York. The other key definition I want to walk through is the definition of a qualified railroad asset. Now this is a multi-part definition. The first part is that assets, to be a qualified railroad asset, you need assets that are owned or controlled by an eligible applicant. We'll discuss the eligible applicants in a moment. Ownership is relatively straightforward, but when it comes to control, that means control over the project, typically through agreements indicating the management or decision-making authority that that applicant has over the assets. The point is that you must demonstrate that the proposed benefits can be delivered and sustained over time. Now, the second part of a qualified railroad asset is that the assets are included in relevant planning and policy documents. And here, the way you satisfy this provision depends on whether you are on the Northeast Corridor territory that we just defined or off that corridor. And the first item is a capital plan. If you're off the corridor, we would look to state rail plans, and as applicable, any transportation improvement programs or statewide transportation improvement programs, the TIP or STIPs, for having that project listed in those documents. And on the corridor, we would look to the currently approved Northeast Corridor Commission 5-year capital investment plan. There's also a cost sharing requirement. And again, off the corridor, we'd look to see if you were a territory that is involved in Amtrak state-supported route cost-sharing policy, also referred to as PREA 209, or a similar agreement that's specific to the particular project you're putting forward. On the corridor, that territory is subject to the Northeast Corridor commuter and intercity passenger rail cost allocation policy, which is also referred to as PREA 212. Finally, to be a qualified railroad asset, it also needs to be a set of assets that were not in a state of repair as of the date of enactment of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or FAST Act, which was passed on December 4th, 2015. That act is the act that established this program, and is why that date of enactment is used. It is on the applicant to demonstrate that the assets in question involved in your project fully meet this definition. And remember, it does require you to meet all three provisions. Now, we mentioned eligible applicants. This is the list of eligible applicants for the partnership program. You can see, states, groups of states, public agencies, publicly chartered authorities, political subdivisions of states, which would be municipal governments or county governments or other sort of smaller local governments, Amtrak, or any combination of these entities listed above. The one thing I'll note is private firms, including freight railroads, are not directly eligible applicants in this program. They may, as noted in the box at the bottom, they may be included as a partner on an application that is submitted by one or more eligible applicants. The partnership program, we do have selection preference for joint applications. Those are applications submitted by multiple eligible applicants. So, an application submitted by 2 states or Amtrak in partnership with another public agency. But we would look at that to make sure there are multiple eligible applicants. Someone submitting with one eligible applicant with an ineligible applicant would not trigger the selection preference. There are non-federal matching requirements in this program. The statutory requirement is that the federal share of costs cannot exceed 80% of the total project cost. FRA is also limiting the first 20% of non-federal match, the statutorily required non-federal match, to cash contributions only. We then will accept in-kind contributions as well as additional cash for any contributions beyond that first 20%. Also note that Amtrak has a particular allowance in this program. If they are an applicant, Amtrak may use its ticket or other non-federal revenues that it generates from business operations as non-federal matching funds. It is on Amtrak to demonstrate that the match funds they would put forward under that provision are in fact sourced from the revenue or business operations. And then in the box at the bottom, you see the selection preferences related to matching funds. We have a preference if you reach 50% or greater non-federal match, so a 50-50 split or greater. And for non-federal shares that consist of match funding from multiple sources that demonstrate broad participation and cross-sharing from all the affected stakeholders in the project. Talking about the eligible projects in the partnership program, here's how we would look at their criteria for project eligibility. First, we need capital projects. Now that may include final design, but we will not do awards for final design only. We could award final design in conjunction with an award that also includes project construction. But that does mean that planning, preliminary engineering, and National Environmental Policy Act clearances are not eligible under this NOFO. Then we look to make sure the project meets the qualified railroad asset definition that I went through above. And then the project you're planning to carry out should execute one or more of the following activities. You could replace existing assets in kind or replace them with new assets that increase capacity, provide a higher level of service. You can have a project that ensures that current service can be maintained while existing assets are brought into state of repair, or you can bring existing assets into a state of repair. Now, obviously, there's some overlap in those definitions, but you would want to make sure to demonstrate your project meets these criteria. If you're on the Northeast Corridor, again, as that territory was defined up above, there's an additional criterion, and that is compliance with the Northeast Corridor cost allocation policy. And this applies to the intercity and commuter rail passenger transportation providers who provide service at the project location where the assets in question are located. Those providers providing service there, they must be compliant with the cost allocation policy, and they must maintain their compliance through the duration of the project. We are looking for applicants to indicate affirmatively in their applications their compliance status with the cost allocation policy. On evaluation selection criteria, for evaluation, we'll look at technical merit and project benefits. On the technical merit side, there are 7 different items that are listed in the NOFO that are just summarized here. But we will look to see that the actual proposal and the proposed project is scaled appropriately to the actual expected outcomes, that there's a reasonable scope for the desired outcomes and benefits of the project. We'll look to the qualifications of key personnel and organizations that are applying. We'll look at the project business plan and any involvement with the private sector. We'll look to applicants' legal, financial, and technical capabilities to carry out the project. We'll look to see that they've completed pre-construction work that would demonstrate strong project readiness. And we'll also look to the consistency with planning documents as mentioned before, on the qualified railroad assets. On project benefits, we'll be talking about the benefit cost analysis later in the presentation. We also have a focus on the features listed here, the effects on system performance, safety, integration with other travel modes, and the ability to meet current or future demand for intercity passenger rail services. Selection criteria are specified there. The one preference I don't think I covered previously is there is also selection preference for applications where Amtrak is not the sole applicant. So applications where Amtrak's not the sole applicant, as well as applications from multiple eligible applicants trigger the selection preference. And then you can see the departmental objectives that we'll also look at during selection. Finally, for me, I wanted to note a couple other requirements and restrictions in the partnership program. First, and I did mention this before, we're not funding preliminary engineering, National Environmental Policy Act, or any related clearances under the NOFO. From a grant perspective, pre-award costs incurred prior to selection or without a NEPA determination or prior written approval from us at FRA would be unallowable costs for that project. And we also are prohibited under the legal provision there for providing partnership program grants for commuter rail passenger transportation. And I want to mention that what that means is we cannot fund sole benefit commuter or, for that matter, freight rail projects under this program. Applicants need to demonstrate that they have a reasonable investment in intercity passenger rail transportation projects. We also note that many such projects may be located on shared corridors where commuter rail passenger transportation also benefits. Applicants can identify the commuter rail transportation benefits in their applications and in their benefit cost analysis, but the emphasis and the determination is to still make sure that you have a reasonable investment in intercity passenger rail. With that, I'll pass the presentation over to my colleague Amy Hauser, who will go through more information about the NOFO and how to apply.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So for folks that don't know me, I'm a program analyst in FRA's grant division. So first, just some basics that some folks may already know. What is a NOFO? We refer to that using that acronym. It's our notice of funding opportunity that announces the grant opportunity to the public, and it provides information about the grant requirements, as well as important details for you as applicants, so that you're sure to follow the requirements and procedures to request federal funding for eligible projects. It's also in our web link. You can read the NOFO if you haven't taken a look at it already. So this slide, it shows some of the key parts of NOFOs. This is the same for each one of the NOFOs that you look at for our grant programs. I've highlighted here probably what's most important for the applicants that you really need to follow as you're preparing your application. And that includes making sure that you are eligible, as well as your project, making sure that you follow the application and submission information, as well as you look at what's important for the application review. So this is where you're going to start. So to find information about FRA's grant programs, the best place that I always tell folks to look at our website. And you'll see at the top when you go out to our website that you'll see the partnership grant program right at the top. That's the program we're currently accepting applications for right now. On that page, you can also link to some summary information about the grant program, and you'll also see a link where the NOFO announces the grant opportunity in the Federal Register. So as you go and you look at the Federal Register, you can see again that this announcement was published on November 16th. We have a fairly long application period, but do note that applications are due on March 18th, and that's very strict at that time frame. If you submit your application a minute after 5, it will not be reviewed. So make sure that you give yourself lots of time to apply for the grant program. Also, another thing that I've highlighted here is the CFDA number. You can use that number for future use in the application process to find out more specific information about the grant program. So next we have a polling question for you. So with this polling question, I'm interested in knowing how much experience folks have using grants.gov. Okay, so it looks like we have about a third of the folks that are very experienced using grants.gov. So this will just be a refresher for you, the next few slides that I'm going to be going over. Some folks with limited experience, again, this information you might want to pay attention to. Those with no experience, I'll be going over some of the important details that you need to ensure that you know as you look in grants.gov, but you can always give me a call if you run into any type of problem. So the first thing is, after you read the NOFO and you decide the eligibility criteria are those that you can meet with your project, as well as the applicant eligibility, you'll need to access grants.gov to apply electronically, as well as find other information about the grant opportunity. We do not accept hard copy applications, nor applications that are emailed to us. So you need to ensure that you submit your application on grants.gov. So a way to find the particular partnership grant information, you can do that by typing in the CFDA number 20.326, and it'll lead you right to that information. Or you can also search for all FRA grants. You'll see the grant program listed as on this slide, and you just click on that opportunity number, and then you'll go on and see a synopsis of the grant program. So the synopsis, this page, it gives you a summary about the grant program. In particular, this one shows the partnership grant opportunity, and this is where you'll start your application on the grants.gov. And then as you look at some of the other tabs, you will get other information, as well as, as you're thinking, well, how do I apply? Even before you can get into grants.gov, you've got to make sure that you've got what we call a DUNS number, or Dun and Bradstreet number, as well as register in the Federal Government System for Award Management, or SAM. So be sure you give yourselves plenty of time to register in these systems. Sometimes it can take 2 weeks or even more for that registration. So definitely start early. Do not wait till the last minute to register in those systems. Okay, so what do you include in your application? These are the key documents that we're going to be looking at as the project narrative. That's really the heart of your application. And Will Dyer is going to be talking some more about that, as well as your statement of work. Those two documents are the documents that the technical evaluators will be focusing in on as they look at rating your application. Include information about the environmental compliance. If it's complete, you can include your NEPA documentation, or you can include a web link to that information if you'd like. And then be sure you also include your benefit cost analysis. So the forms, these forms, that sometimes there is a little bit of confusion about the forms. Most of the forms that folks will be filling out for be sure you fill out your SF424. And then if you most likely have a construction project, fill out the 424C and 424D. If it's a non-construction project, that would be, in this case, maybe if you're procuring equipment, then you would fill out the SF424A or SF424B. Note that if you have a combination, you don't have to fill out all four. If it includes construction at all, do fill out the forms for construction. You'll also need to include FRA's additional assurances and certifications form and the disclosure of lobbying activities form. So most of these forms, you'll see that there are electronic versions in your grants.gov workspace. One of the major exceptions is our FRA's additional assurances and certifications. And we're working with grants.gov right now to get that on your grants.gov workspace. I'm not so sure we'll make it by March to get it in there. So what you'll need to do is you're going to go to the related documents tab in grants.gov, and you'll click on the link that I have highlighted there, download the form, complete it, and then you'll attach it in your application as an attachment. So this is one of those forms that a lot of folks do either forget to include, or I get a lot of emails or calls about where to find it. So I know that is a little bit different than the other forms, but please be sure that you also include that form as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Will and Nate, and they'll talk a bit about best practices.
Thanks, Amy. Again, my name's Will Dyer. I'm the Division Chief for Rail Planning at FRA, and I'll be joined momentarily by my colleague Nate Vomisil, one of our industry economists. And we're going to share some best practices and lessons learned that we've been able to glean from our most recent CRISI evaluations that we think can help you all put together solid applications for federal-state partnership. So first and foremost, this might be obvious, but please read the Notice of Funding Opportunity completely and carefully. Many questions that you may have will be answered in the NOFO. So if you have a question, please refer back to that first. But with that said, FRA has been able to identify 3 primary areas where applications that do not compete well typically demonstrate deficiencies. And that's the project narrative, the statement of work, and the benefit cost analysis. So we're going to provide a little bit more information on each of those areas. So in the NOFO, for the project narrative, we provide an outline about how it should be structured. Half the battle in preparing a successful project narrative is adhering to this outline and just following the instructions provided for each element. We also ask that you adhere to the 25-page limitation restriction that we state in the NOFO. So I'm going to briefly go through each one of these outline elements to describe some lessons learned and some pitfalls. So first is the cover page. Most people actually do this correctly, so that's pretty good. But we do ask, as Brian mentioned earlier in the presentation, that if you've submitted an application for a CRISI or build project earlier this year or in years past, please let us know that on the cover page. And again, if anything has changed in this application compared to your previous applications. Next is the project summary. We ask that you provide a brief, 4 to 6 sentence description of your project. And we really want you to think of this as your elevator pitch to either the DOT secretary or FRA administrator about your project. This is typically the first place where FRA staff will turn to when we respond to internal information requests about a particular project from our leadership. Next is project funding. We ask that you insert a funding table that specifies each source of non-federal match for your project, and that you indicate whether those sources of match are public or private sector. We also ask that you identify any conditions that are attached to your match, such as if the match will be must be spent by a certain deadline or will not be available until maybe your state's budget is passed. In terms of applicant eligibility, pretty straightforward. Just speak to how your entity fulfills one of the 6 eligible applicant categories that Brian mentioned earlier in this webinar. In terms of project eligibility, same thing. Just be clear about whether you're applying for a project that's located on the Northeast Corridor or off the Northeast Corridor. It's really important that you demonstrate how your project meets those qualified railroad asset standards that Brian talked about earlier. And then again, just a reminder, final design is not eligible on its own. It has to be in conjunction with a project that's going to construction. In terms of the detailed project description, this is where you build off of that short project summary that's provided earlier in the narrative. This is your opportunity to thoroughly discuss the transportation challenges and benefits of your project, describe how the project components are related and how they'll be sequenced. And we ask that you include photographs or diagrams related to your project. It really helps helped your project resonate with both evaluators and decision makers. In terms of project location, this is also pretty straightforward. Just please reiterate the cities, counties, states where your project is located, include a map of the project, and identify any railroad milepost boundaries for your project. Next is the evaluation and selection criteria. This is really important. We ask that you include a separate section in the narrative focused specifically on how your project addresses each one of the evaluation and selection criteria that are specified in the NOFO. Do not rely solely on that project description to satisfy this requirement. We want to see a separate section dedicated to each one of those selection and evaluation criteria. And also, please quantify your benefits whenever possible. This is particularly relevant for the benefit cost analysis that Nate will cover shortly. In terms of project management and implementation, for this element, we ask that you highlight any past experiences you have either managing or overseeing similar projects, and please identify specifically if there are any FRA or DOT funded projects. In terms of environmental readiness, Brian covered this a little bit earlier, but if NEPA is complete, please indicate the date of completion of the environmental review and the type of NEPA clearance document that your project received, whether it was a categorical exclusion, finding of no significant impact, or record of decision. If NEPA is not complete yet, that's okay too, but please identify whether it started, when it's expected to start, and the current status. So now on to the statement of work. So the statement of work is the scope, schedule, and budget for your project. We've developed a template that we ask applicants to use when putting together their statement of work that is linked to both in this webinar and in the NOFO. If you're selected for a grant, the SOW is typically the heart of your grant award, and it's really the core document that FRA uses to manage and oversee your project. But we also like applicants to fill out a statement of work when they're putting together their application, because it really demonstrates to the FRA evaluators the applicant's understanding of what is required for their project and how ready they are to move towards project implementation. So in developing your statement of work, please organize the scope of work into discrete and logically sequenced tasks and identify the deliverables that are required to communicate progress and completion of each one of those tasks. Back in 2016, FRA issued capital cost estimating guidance that included standard cost categories for rail projects. We ask that you utilize those standard cost categories as a way to organize the scope of work and your budget. And again, that is linked to here in this webinar. Also, please ensure consistency among the project narrative, the statement of work, the benefit cost analysis, and any other materials you may submit. There's been more than one occasion where we get significantly different information about your project in each one of those application requirements. It's really important that we have a consistent story throughout all of your materials. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over now to Nate Vomisil to talk a bit about the benefit cost analysis that's required.
Thanks, Will. As Will said, benefit cost analysis is another area where we found some people have had some shortcomings, so we just wanted to address a few of those. First, we have a question though, just to kind of get a sense of the audience of whether or not you guys have experience with BCAs. Okay, so it looks like majority of people have some experience, but a significant amount of you have not had experience with these yet. You'll get our contact information. Benefit cost analysis can be pretty involved, and we're not really going that deeply into them today. If you have additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. And like I said, my information will be at the end of the presentation. Generally, this is the outline of a benefit cost analysis that you would want to use for basically any FRA or DOT benefit cost analysis, we do follow the DOT guidance that they update every year. The most recent one came out in June. There will probably be another one sometime next summer. But if you follow their most recent published guidance, then you will be okay with us as well. So if we'll take each one of these separately. The first one is the scope of the analysis. It's very important that the scope of your analysis match the scope of your project. We've had situations in the past where people they're applying for a subcomponent of an overall series of projects, and they'll have a benefit cost analysis for the entire master plan. We, however, need a benefit cost analysis for the project that you are submitting. If the dollars that you are proposing to spend would not be sufficient to receive the benefits that you are proposing, we do strike them from your analysis. The benefit cost analysis should match the project that you intend to build as part of the grant. It's also very important to note that your alternate case is your proposed project, and it is not a savings over some other alternate that you did not take. If there were 3 or 4 alternates and you chose the lowest cost one, the difference between the lowest cost and the highest cost is essentially irrelevant. That is not information that we will be taking into account. And as benefit cost analysis are essentially marginal analyses, only the difference between your base case, which is the world as it exists today, and your alternate case, which is your proposed project, should be examined. If you are proposing a project and you're saying this is anticipation of a different project that will be completed at some future point, the benefits of that additional future project are irrelevant. Again, should be focused on the current project. That is not to say, however, that future growth in your ridership cannot be taken into account. So if this project is undertaken to meet your future ridership demands, that's okay. You should just document those assumptions within your benefit. And your benefit cost analysis, excuse me. And it's very important, we have a lot of expertise here at FRA, and for the things that we don't have expertise on, we know who to contact to get that expertise. So if we feel like certain assumptions are very unreasonable, we will do our best to find out what a more reasonable assumption is, and we'll adjust your benefit cost analysis as appropriate. If you feel like something is reasonable, but it may seem a little suspect at first glance, just go ahead and document, provide support for that assumption, and we'll be happy to review that and ensure that the analysis itself reflects reality as best we can. Like I said before, marginal effects are what we are concerned about, the effects of the change between the current state and the state of the world after the build project. At times, that can also include undesirable consequences. That's certainly much more of a problem with freight or like highway projects rather than passenger rail, but they do occur. So if there are undesirable consequences to the project, they should be included as negative benefits, like a negative dollar amount in the benefit category. And this is the second point is very important for state of good repair projects. DOT guidance is that if you are constructing new infrastructure, the O&M on that new equipment or new infrastructure should be, for the entire lifetime of the project, should be included as a cost. However, if you are replacing existing infrastructure, and that would result in a reduction or even an increase in O&M costs, those should be project benefits. If the new and improved infrastructure would actually increase O&M costs, they should again be included as negative benefits. But hopefully they will be, generally speaking, improved infrastructure will lower your costs. But that is important, and the details of that are in the DOT BCA guidance. When you are developing your BCA, it's important that you spend as much time as you can actually spelling out the effects of the project itself and breaking them down into the smallest possible details. I mean, this should really be 90% of the actual work of developing the benefit cost analysis itself. The math that you do at the end is important, but making sure you get the effects right, the magnitude of the effects right, what direction those effects are going to go, is really going to have an impact on how well we rate your benefit cost analysis. And so the example there you can see at the bottom, replacing a bridge, all four of those bullet points are the same, essentially the same thing, right? They will all reduce travel time savings. However, they will reduce travel time savings in a different way and with different assumptions and with different cumulative effects. So by dividing it up to the smallest portions possible, we can really verify that you've done your homework and that these are reasonable estimations of what will occur, and then we are more likely to accept your final conclusion. This is especially important. Modal diversion is especially important to take a second to mention for passenger rail projects, as a large portion of your benefits will come from getting people off the highways. That's usually the major source of benefits for commuter and intercity passenger rail projects. Again, I would recommend that people follow DOT guidance. New users to your system because of the project are counted at 50%, not 100%. And avoiding lost passenger revenue as a result of not taking the project is not considered a benefit. The dollars that the passengers would have spent on with your service would have to be spent on other things like the vehicle operating costs of their own vehicles or on a different mode. So those are not actually benefits, they are transfers between your service and someone else's service. We do realize that it is in fact a loss to you, but that is how OST has directed us to consider those particular benefits. So this is just, once all of that has been established, this is just what your benefit cost analysis should look like when you submit it. Let's see here. So as you can see, each individual category is across the top, each year is a row, and each individual dollar amount should be able to be traced back to a specific year and a specific benefit or cost category. Then very quickly, you want to sum all of those benefits individually and all of the costs individually, and then use this equation to discount those. It's very important that you discount your benefits. If you forget to do that, we will do it for you following the DOT guidance. And that can lead to a lot of surprises when people forget to do that and they think they had a positive program, but they in fact did not. So after you have discounted those values, you'll see down here at the bottom, you have the sum of the discounted values. And those are the two important numbers that you need to come up with. If you subtract the costs from the benefits, you get your net present value, which is one of the final numbers that we would like reported. And the other number would be the benefits divided by the costs for your benefit cost ratio. So those are really the two big numbers that we're looking for as like a final output of your benefit cost analysis, and they should be, reported somewhere that's easily visible. Again, it is extremely important to document your assumptions in much detail as possible. And if you are including modal diversion as a benefit, if you're saying we're taking people off the highway, it's important to include your ridership counts and any applicable traffic counts for the corridors that would be competing service, if that information is available. We do have, like I said, we do have the US DOT guidance, and we have smaller frequently asked questions that kind of just clarifies some of the points of the BCA guidance with rail specific examples. If you are having this is an additional tool that FRA provides for grade crossing and grade separation programs. We're very confident in it. So if you have one of those, projects and you put it into this program and it spits out a positive answer, then you're golden. Save the output of that and send it to us, and that's pretty much all we need for those particular types of projects. And again, we have within the documentation, we have contact information if you need help with grade deck. So I'll turn it back over to Amy to just have some recaps and final reminders.
Thank you, Nate. Just a few reminders. Be sure that you read the NOFO very carefully, as Will mentioned. Lots of good information in there. If you have any questions, then you can definitely contact one of us. After you've done that, make sure that you understand what a successful project will look like. If you haven't done so already, make sure you have your DUNS number and you register in SAM and grants.gov early. When applying through grants.gov, you can use the Track My Application function. Also use the checklist that is in the NOFO as you complete your application. Be sure you align your strategies, activities, and other application content, particularly, as Will mentioned, the budget information. Make sure it matches what you have in your forms as well as what you have in your project narrative and other documentation. Only include projects costs expected to be incurred after selection of the grant. This was particularly important. Some of you said you attended the PTC webinars, and if you submitted an application, if work is ongoing, definitely project out about the time that the project would begin with this particular grant. Next, be sure you address all the evaluation and selection criteria on which you'll be rated. It's really important that you do so because our technical evaluators, they'll look and see what you think is most important in meeting the evaluation and selection criteria, as well as they go through your application and take a look at it. Be sure that you are clear and directly respond to the criteria so that your application is easy to read and evaluate. So don't bury key points. It's good to have that application, all the information is right out there in front of folks. So our evaluators reviewed numerous applications, so it's good to have that information such that it's easy to find. Be sure that you name your key partners. That's especially important in this one since having other eligible applicants is an important preference. Also indicate any in-place agreements that you may have, as well as include those letters of support. Again, align your strategies, activities, staffing, and other application content, and only include those project costs that are expected to be incurred after selection. So with that, we're going to start with our question and answer period, and I believe we're going to start first with the advanced questions. So just a little recap on what you need to do before we get to those questions. On your screen, you can see the contact information for our speakers. Please reach out to us by email or give us a call if you have any questions. So now we're going to get to your questions. Please note that that the presentation, I think some folks have asked questions about where's the presentation file. It's going to be available on our website. If you have some questions, I see we have some already, but type those questions in the chat pod at the top of your screen. We'll be trying to answer as many as we can, but some may require some additional time for us to respond. So if we don't answer your question today, please email one of the folks on the screen if you have a question or if you think of one later.